and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, as crops are coming off the field, Brian, soil tests are getting sent in, and one of the most important nutrients is potassium. We're going to talk about potassium today and how you can tell if you've got enough and how you can adjust your program to get more out of the potassium you're applying.
Well, you're not going to find this with your soil test that you're using for plant nutrients, but you have to be thinking about herbicide carryover going into next year because it was a dry year this season. We're going to talk about some of the factors when it comes to herbicide breakdown and if or if not you should be concerned going into next year.
Well, we've got a difficult to control weed of the week that's really catching some guys by surprise, especially out in cornfields. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty Herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty Herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss why you'll see strips left out in fields. Why is 99% of the field harvested, Darren? And then there's a strip of corn out there. What's going on?
Well, there have been some fields this year that were chopped as early as July for silage, and there are strips left out in those fields. And you say, well, wait a minute, I don't understand that. Why are there like 4 rows of corn sitting out in the middle of this cornfield? Why didn't they just take it all? Well, one of the reasons that some of the corn was left, especially early in the season, was for insurance adjustments. For crop insurance, if you've got a total loss out in your field or a loss that's very significant, what crop insurance adjusters will do is say, all right, you can go ahead and chop that field for silage, leave me a couple of strips, and I'll look at those strips and adjust that out for you.
Yeah, but specifically what they're talking about is you need to leave 4 rows every 20 acres. That's what we were told ourselves on our farm, 4 rows every 20 acres. So if you've got an 80-acre field, you might see 4 strips out in that field. That's the reason why.
And for insurance adjustment, they can look at the ears of corn there, estimate what the yields were, and in some cases this year with the extreme drought, the yields were 0 to 5 bushels per acre, but still they have to go out and check those just to verify that everything's on the up and up.
All right, let's talk about other reasons why you might see that. One of the things is some people love wildlife. And,
like you do right here, Brian, on the edge of this field?
Well, anyway, I don't really love wildlife quite that much that I want them eating all my corn, but a lot of people want to make sure that they've got some deer around the place for hunting later this fall, and so they leave a few strips out there to let the deer feed on. And you know, it really doesn't amount to that many total dollars. Even if you left an entire acre of corn out there, I mean, how many dollars are you talking? $1,000, $1,200 at maximum yield, and this year a lot of guys were half yield, so you might have $500. So is it worth $500 to you to have some extra deer out there? A lot of people would say yes.
Well, it also may leave a little bit of cover for other animals, smaller animals, maybe pheasants or other things that you may have out on your farm. So that may be a nice thing to do too. The other thing you'll see is sometimes people will leave strips right along roads, and what they're trying to do is catch snow. Now, this could be kind of for 2 different purposes. One may be they live on that road. They want to catch the snow in the field so it doesn't drift over the road and make it impossible to pass through. The other side of it, especially as you move further west in our country, is farmers are trying to catch the snow because they need that moisture. And if they can get the snow to drift up and get deep out in their field, well, that's that much more moisture that can soak in the spring. And in some cases, we've seen some big time yield impacts around tree belts or around these strips of crop farmers leave to catch those snow drifts because those particular areas, the soils get fully charged with water. And years like this year where we have a big drought, it can really pay off.
Okay, so what's the downside to doing this? Other than the money, about the only thing I can really think of is if you're leaving this just like as a windbreak, for example, and you don't have a bunch of deer in your area, some of that corn is going to fall down by spring. And that's going to mean volunteer corn next year, and you might have some strips of volunteer corn out in your soybeans or whatever crop you choose to raise. So you might have some additional cost for weed control the next year. You know, other than that, I can't really think of any
No, you
big
may just
downside.
have to do a little bit of tillage just in that one strip in your field. It's no big deal, and maybe the rest of your field is minimum till, but you know what? You got to do full-scale tillage just through 4 rows or 6 rows or however wide you left that strip for the windbreak or the deer feeding or whatever the case may be. It's no big deal. It's no huge loss for farmers. It's no huge expense for them, but it's something that in many cases could be good either for wildlife, good for the roads and your safety during the winter, or just good for the crop for next year if you can save more snow out in the field.
Well, one thing that's never good for your crop is having our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to identify and control it coming up later in the show.
Back in 1966, Advanced Drainage Systems, Inc. was the first company to start manufacturing plastic agricultural drainage pipe in the United States. And today, ADS continues our leadership with superior pipe production and service capabilities. Our roots are firmly entrenched in the agriculture industry, and we're committed to helping farmers grow their business. With 54 manufacturing plants and 24 distribution yards throughout the world, you can count on ADS and our green striped pipe to be there when you need us. Advanced Drainage Systems, the green striped pipe you can count on.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
For lower costs and higher production, Mandaco leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving in rocks and has contour conformity equaling zero downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier and less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call 877-915-8790.
With Roundup Ready Plus weed management solutions, the pluses really add up. You can count on expert advice, herbicide recommendations, plus weed control incentives for your higher-yielding seeds and advanced traits. With Roundup Ready Plus, Ingenuity Roundup Ready-to-Yield soybeans, you have the solutions you need to effectively subtract your weed problems. And that adds up to yield. For more details, visit RoundupReadyPlus.com.
Case IH set the standard for improving power and fuel economy with SCR technology, while others were still trying to decide what the standard was. Only efficient power from Case IH is proven in the field 10,000 times over. And you'll find it in all our high horsepower equipment, from tractors to combines to sprayers. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
To learn more about how you can be ready with a proven leader, visit caseih.com/efficientpower.
One of the most misunderstood plant nutrients is potassium, and what it comes down to is a lot of people will soil test, they'll get a parts per million reading, and they'll say, oh, I get enough parts per million. But is that all you need?
Well, when it comes to potassium, you're looking at a primary nutrient. We've got nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They're the nutrients that our plants need the largest quantities of. So for a lot of guys, they say, well, you know what, I gotta make sure that I have those three right, then I'll start worrying about the other ones. Well, you know what, with nitrogen, I think for the most part, we've got a pretty good handle on how much we need. And phosphorus, you know what, most guys are doing a pretty good job on phosphorus. Where we see a lot of guys falling down across the country is potassium. This is evidenced by our plant tissue analysis. We've done a lot of plant tissue analysis around the region. Potassium seems to be one of the big ones that we're short on.
It doesn't seem to be the biggest. It is the biggest problem that we've got in our region and really across the United States because, again, potassium is misunderstood. Parts per million is not enough. Here's what you need. On any farm, anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world, you should not just be looking at parts per million. You should be looking at your base saturation test. And if you're not getting that, you have to. Otherwise, you don't really know if you have enough potassium or not. What base saturation tells you is the ratio of potassium to other nutrients. And if you don't have your potassium in ratio, you're going to have deficiencies in the plant. Period. You need to have your potassium in the range of 4 to 8% in base saturation. And the other nutrients that I'm talking about is calcium, magnesium, hydrogen, and sodium. So in other words, in a lot of our soils, for example, we have so much calcium, we have so much magnesium that if we have what I would consider an average amount of potassium, it's not in ratio, it's not enough, and we end up short. In plant tissue analysis, like Darren said, we'll see plants that are suffering from potassium deficiency. You can see the visual signs on the leaves. For example, in corn, potassium deficiency shows up when the lower leaves have yellowing on the outside edge of the leaf. That's potassium deficiency. All those things are bad, and it's not that tough. Just get some more potassium out there, get enough out there so you get up in that range of 4 to 8% with base saturation.
Well, in extreme potassium deficiencies, Brian, we'll see the same thing in soybeans where the outside edges of the leaf turn yellow. And when I saw it on some ground that I bought a few years ago, I knew, wow, we've got a real potassium issue out here because soybeans, It takes a strong potassium deficiency to show up in the plant. And when you think about potassium needs though, really soybeans actually use more potassium than what corn does. And a lot of guys say, well, I don't understand. My corn yields are going up, my corn yields are doing well, but my soybean yields just don't seem to be keeping up. And a lot of times the difference could be potassium out in your fields.
Yeah, so if you want to know how much potassium your crop really needs, we do have a free app now at Ag PhD. So on your iPad or iPhone, just go to the App Store and look up Ag PhD fertilizer removal. And then you can click in whatever crop you've got and it will tell you how much potassium you're removing from the soil. Now the other thing is, when you talk to some soil scientists out there, they will tell you, well, there's already a whole bunch of potassium in the soil. And you know what? In a lot of cases, they're right. But do you know what form that potassium is in? Well, it's in the form of feldspars. Feldspars are rock. And rock isn't going to break down very quickly. So most of the potassium that's in your soil, it's not going to come available. And in fact, a lot of the potassium that you apply, let's say you put potash out on your ground, how quickly is that going to come available? It's going to take a long time to break down, especially in a dry year. I'll guarantee you, in a drought year like this year, if you put potash out in the spring, a lot of that was not available for your crop. So that's why a lot of farmers are turning to liquid K sources to, if nothing else, at least supplement what they've got out there already for potassium, because you have to have enough available potassium for any crop you're raising or you're just not going to get the yields you're hoping for.
Well, I agree with you, Brian. I think the dry sources this year, there's a lot of those dry pellets still out in fields. It's not good when you don't get much rain. So if you want to get stuff to break down quickly, a liquid form sure takes one of the steps out of the equation. When you look at something that's dry, it's got to have enough moisture to break that pellet down first, then it has to have enough moisture to bring it into the crop. With the liquid, you've already got it broken down. Now you just need a little bit of rain to get it into the crop. And I'm doing a lot of my potassium right in the furrow as I'm planting. That way I know that I've got it out there. I know it's in close proximity to my roots. I know they're going to find it, and that way it seems to work for me.
Now here's the other thing I want you to consider is most plant nutrients are going to come into the plant through water. Okay, if we have a dry year, what dries out in your soil? The top or down 6, 8, 12 inches deep? Well, obviously up top is going to dry out first. So what I'm trying to say here is a lot of times there's still moisture down at a foot or down at 2 feet, but very often we don't have available potassium down there. So I just want you to consider at least doing some strip till or deep banding of some sort to get some more potassium down a little bit deeper in your ground that's available that your plants can use in a dry year like this one.
Well, it does make sense to get down a little deeper. So here's one thing you could do too. When you're soil sampling this fall, take a 0 to 6 inch sample, then take a sample 6 to 12 inches deep, 12 to 18 inches deep, and 18 to 24 inches deep. If you've never done it before, just do it in a couple areas out in one field just to start building your knowledge base on your farm. When you look at the nutrients, what we're seeing is the top 6 inches has most of our potassium. Once we get down even 6 to 12 inches, we don't have very much. And when our roots are going down deep in the summer, looking for moisture and looking for food, well, if they don't find enough food, they keep sucking in more water, trying to bring that food in, and they're just less efficient with their water use. That's why some fields burnt up a lot quicker than fields right across the road. It came down to fertility in many cases.
Yeah, so basically you have to have ample fertility, but you have to have the right types of fertility out there too. Well, once again, potassium is extremely important. You knew that already. It's one of the primary nutrients, but what you probably didn't know is that most farmers around the United States are actually short on available potassium, and it is the limiting factor. It is the yield limiting factor when it comes to their crops. So at least consider doing some more soil testing, take a look at base saturation, and consider adding some more potassium next year, especially in the liquid form and especially a little deeper down in the soil if you want better availability.
Better fertility is great for crop production, but it means nothing if you don't control the weeds. Can you identify this week's weed?
Speed, strength, and efficiency make Capello corn heads a head above the rest. Built with polymer components that exceed industry standards, Capello corn heads continue to push the boundaries for maximizing grain retention while using less energy. Visit CapelloUSA.com and learn more about Capello's state-of-the-art chopping technology that cuts cleaner, allowing your horsepower to remain where it belongs, with your combine, so you can harvest faster in all weather conditions. Add to that an amazing folding feature, and it's clear to see why Capello is a head above the rest.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
It takes a whole team of people to record a song. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Azar, singer, songwriter, and recording artist. I'd like you to meet Mike Larson, an attorney at Swenson Investments and Commodities.
Like recording a hit country song, it takes a team to put together a good farm estate plan. I work with you, your attorneys, your bankers, and your advisors. What are my chances of touring with you?
About as good as growing a head of hair. Call Mike Larson at Swenson Investments and Commodities.
Everything is better to the power of Nutrisphere N. Proven to shield against leaching, volatilization, and denitrification, Nutrisphere N Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager helps you maximize the efficiency of your nitrogen applications. In fact, research shows that in 184 corn trials, Nutrisphere N increases yields by an average of 13.2 bushels per acre. Do the math for yourself. Contact your local fertilizer dealer today and take your operation to the power of Nutrisphere N.
Harvest season will soon be over, but don't put away your equipment until you bring it into Titan Machinery, your Case IH dealer. Take advantage of our Uptime Maintenance program. Uptime is Titan's preventative maintenance service designed to eliminate costly downtime during the short working season. Our technicians average more than 10 years of experience and use a comprehensive checklist to find problems before they slow you down. Call Titan Machinery today to schedule your Uptime service so you can spend the winter worry-free. Titan Machinery and Case IH. Better solutions.
Darren, there were a lot of bad things that happened this year related to not having enough moisture. We had drought, horrible crops, and now this could cause a problem going into next year because we're worried about herbicide carryover.
You know, it's not so bad when you can take your lumps this year. You say, you know what, it was a bad year, boom,
right.
We harvest, it's a short crop, we're done. Well, no, you're not. There are some products that you may have applied for weed control on your farm that could still be hanging around out there that could impact your decisions for next year. What we're talking about here is herbicide carryover.
What we want to focus on today is what are the factors that you need to consider on your farm for if you're going to have herbicide carryover or if you're not. And the number one factor is how much soil residual does the product I'm using actually have? Does the product that you used actually hurt the next crop you're going to plant? So for example, let's say you used Outlook or Harness or Surpass in corn. Is that really going to carry over long enough to hurt your soybeans next year? And even if it did, is it actually going to hurt the soybeans? No and no. So I wouldn't even worry about those products. They're kind of off the table, okay? But there are a number of other products. Let's focus on the soil factors that we really want to look at when it comes to carryover.
Well, let's look at soil pH first. That's the biggest thing when we're looking at soil tests just for crop production, but it's also huge in terms of breaking down herbicides. We've got some herbicides that have big time problems when we have high pH, and we have other herbicides that have big problems with low pH. So like for example, Pursuit is one. A lot of guys were using Optil, Extreme, Authority Assist, or even just Pursuit or Raptor straight. I mean, there are a lot of combinations that have those products in them. If you have low pH soils, if you're down in the 5s in certain parts of your field, number one, you better get liming. You should be worried more about getting lime on than just about anything else in those fields. But number two, you should be very concerned about herbicide carryover, especially if you use Pursuit or one of those relatives.
Okay, on the high side of things, that's where we see more atrazine carryover. And quite honestly, there are a lot of other products that will carry over in high pHs. And what we're talking about here is the ideal soil pH is 6.8 for most crops. Outside that range, you don't have a big problem if you're a half point one side or the other. So 6.3 to 7.3, not a big deal in terms of crop production. You can still get good yield in terms of nutrient availability, and in terms of herbicide carryover, you generally don't have as much problem. So anything below 6.3 or anything above 7.3, that's where you start seeing more carryover problems, and we want to be concerned about that. You got to take a look at that hard, and it might be in most of your field there's no issue, but then in spots you've got an 8.5 pH. Well, in those spots you're probably going to have some herbicide carryover if you have atrazine or Classic or a number of other products. So just make sure that you're talking to your agronomist, looking on the ag chem labels and checking to find out if you're going to have issues with the herbicide you used.
And with soil pH, that also impacts all that soil life out there, all little bacteria and fungi and other things that are living in your soil that help actually break down herbicides.
So going into the fall, other things that you might want to consider is if your herbicide's still laying on top of the ground, does sunlight break that particular herbicide down? Another thing is vapor pressure. So let's say, for example, last spring you put out Treflan and you didn't work it in. Well, Treflan has ridiculously high vapor pressure. You probably lost most of your Treflan right then anyway. So herbicide carryover isn't as much of a concern as opposed to if you immediately tilled it in.
Well, the other thing I look at, Brian, is really the timing of when you sprayed your product. Did you spray it out there when there were lots of weeds, that you sprayed it right on the foliage? That's certainly going to reduce the amount of carryover you're going to have. Or did you spray it on bare dirt and then you really didn't get weed growth or moisture to get things into plants? You know, you've got a lot more risk if most of your herbicide landed on the bare soil and there weren't weeds out there versus, hey, I had heavy weed pressure, I couldn't even see my crop, and I sprayed it out there. Well, chances are you're not going to have much carryover in those situations.
All right, the main thing we want to stress to you here to wrap this up is with herbicide carryover, you need to look at the ag chem label, the product you used, and it will say right on there what is the rotational restriction. In other words, how many months until you can plant the crop that you want to plant. In a drought year though, what we want you to do is extend that time. It's something that I just don't want to take a chance on. I'm willing to take a chance on a herbicide that's somewhat questionable in terms of weed control. I miss a few weeds, so what? But if I hurt my next crop, I just suffered from poor income this year. I don't want to have poor income again next year. So be very careful, and in some cases you might have to plant the same crop you planted this year, plant it again next year if you're worried about herbicide carryover.
But the big question, Brian, is going to be, what does it take to kill our weed of the week? Do we have to worry about carryover with those products? We'll show you which ones work best coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Mandaco.
For lower costs and higher production, Mandaco leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. See your Mandaco dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call 877-915-8790.
Weed of the Week, Brian, is one of my favorite weeds. You love it. You love it when I say favorite weeds. It's wild buckwheat.
Okay, so what's the difference between wild buckwheat and field bindweed, because they look almost identical?
Well, field bindweed is a perennial weed, and the first thing that I would look at if you've got a weed and you say, I don't know if it's buckwheat or field bindweed, I just pull it up and take a look at the root system. If it's wild buckwheat, it's an annual weed. It's got a real simple taproot system. If it's field bindweed, you're probably going to see rhizomes running below the ground.
Well, anyway, with wild buckwheat, we're seeing it spread all around the country, in part because Roundup doesn't do a very good job on it at all. Now, I don't know if wild buckwheat's Roundup resistant or not.
It's not resistant. It's never been good on it. That's the whole thing. In burn down situations, we've had buckwheat for years, and Roundup alone doesn't do the job. We've always had to mix in 2,4-D or dicamba in a burn down situation if we want to try and at least burn back.
Well, that's
wild
great
buckwheat.
in corn, but what are you going to do in front of soybeans?
Well, that's the big problem. You know, in soybeans, it's a challenge because a 2-quart rate of Roundup is typically about 80% control on wild buckwheat if conditions are ideal. Sometimes it may not even get half of the wild buckwheat. Then you've got some real issues. So in soybeans, we like to use Pursuit. Pursuit has a nice activity on it as a pre-emerge herbicide. Post-emerge, it does okay. It's really better as a pre. So use something like Optil, Pursuit Plus, Authority Assist.
Yeah,
they do a nice job ahead of soybeans.
Stop you right there though, because if you're going to use the full rate of Optil or the full rate of Pursuit, you're going to have problems with carryover, especially in a dry year like this one. So if it was me, I'd only use a half to maybe 2/3 rate on Pursuit.
And you can be pretty effective at a 2/3 rate Pursuit soil applied. I mean, obviously it's off label, so you're taking your chances, but that's what I'd do. Post-emerge, you can use Flex Star. If you didn't use Pursuit pre, you could certainly use some Pursuit post-emerge, and that'll do an okay job on wild buckwheat. In corn, here's where a lot of guys are falling down. They say, well, wait a minute, it's corn. I should be able to kill broadleaf weeds, but if you're using Callisto, Lotus, or Impact, this is one of those weeds where status is much, much better than what you're going to do with those bleachers.
Okay, turning to wheat, Buctril is fantastic. It's the best product. Think buckwheat, Buctril. So anything that contains Buctril, Husky, Wolfpack, any of those types of products, going to do the best job.
So don't confuse wild buckwheat for field bindweed, but if you do, hey, you got to use something strong to kill it. So use Status in corn, use Buctril or one of the Buctril products like Husky and wheat, and in soybeans, Pursuit's your best answer.
Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
The world of farming is changing. From the power and versatility of Steiger and Magnum tractors to the legendary reliability of axial flow combines, Case IH can help you be ready. To learn more, visit caseih.com/be ready.
With the drought this year, we've got many soils that are fairly hard, and a lot of guys want to get them worked up in the fall. So we're going to talk about, if you're doing some deep ripping, some things you want to watch on your rear points. When we're doing deep tillage in the fall, one thing that we're really concerned about is the sharpness of these points. What happens when the point is sharp is it has a good cutting surface and all the pressure of the soil is to move up. When you do that, you're going to break up compaction layers and do a nice job. What happens as that point starts to wear though, when it gets rounded, is you have some pressure moving up and down. So you're packing the ground below in addition to kicking some soil up. You really don't want to have that packing effect, so you want to make sure that you replace these tips as needed so you have a nice sharp point. Now, a good tip that many farmers use is they'll bring some extra points along with them. That way they've got a new one to compare. So when they go from field to field, they'll just take a look and say, you know, I wonder how I'm wearing out on my tips here. They'll bring the new one out, hold it up next to the old one. If it starts to look too round, then it's a good time to replace those so you don't end up with some compaction out in your field and not doing the job that you want. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show. Hey Brian, it's Farm Guy.
What brings you to our farm?
I watch Ag PhD every week and know that you guys do a lot of field testing.
We test a lot of products here, and when something works, we use it on our farm.
Oh, like agriculture liquid fertilizers. You guys started talking about ProGerminator and SureK on the show a few years ago.
But I was skeptical.
You're always skeptical.
Should Brian be skeptical of agro-liquid fertilizers? Find out at www.farmguytv.com.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Case IH set the standard for improving power and fuel economy with SCR technology, while others were still trying to decide what the standard was. Only efficient power from Case IH is proven in the field 10,000 times over. And you'll find it in all our high horsepower equipment, from tractors to combines to sprayers. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
To learn more about how you can be ready with a proven leader, visit caseih.com/efficientpower.
You can't fill a barrel any fuller than its lowest stave, and your crops can't do any better than the nutrient that's in shortest supply. Your yield potential is only as good as the weakest nutrient in your fertilizer program. Give your crops more than just NPK. Prescription apply all the micronutrients your crop needs, each one customized for your crop's potential. MicroLink, linking yield to potential.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
Introducing the all-new Backsaver Swing Hopper Auger Mover. Backsavers have interchangeable parts which allows you easy access to move or swing your augers to fit your harvesting needs. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for this week's show, but be sure to tune in again next time for another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Farmers often inject plant nutrients in the seed furrow or even 8 to 10 inches deep in the soil. Such practices protect rivers and lakes by keeping fertilizer safely under the soil where only crops can get it. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.